Ladies and gentlemen, it has been exactly over 1 year since the death of Slim Shady has dropped, and I thought now would be a good time to make a little video and reminisce on it and have a look back and kind of discuss where the album is currently in terms of how we think about it. Was it good or was it not? But before we get into it, do make sure to subscribe because we are on the road to 5,000 subscribers, so you pressing that subscribe button will really help us reach that goal. And if you go on to enjoy this video, make sure to leave a like too. But anyway, without further ado, let's start discussing the death of Slim Shady. So the first thing I actually want to discuss when it comes to this album is actually the rollout, because the rollout for this album has probably been the best for Eminem since maybe Revival, because whilst Revival wasn't a great album, there was still a rollout for that album. I won't say it was like anything spectacular, but there was still stuff done just to make like some hype and anticipation for the project. And obviously since that album actually came out and people kind of were hating against it, I think Eminem and his team kind of thought there was a bit of hate due to the fact of they revealed the track list and stuff like that, and people made like judgments on the album just based on that. I don't fully agree with that sentiment, if anything, but it's still one of the reasons why they decided for Kamikaze to surprise drop. They did it again with Music to Be Murdered By, and then coming up to the death of Shady, this was kind of the first time they decided to actually give us an actual rollout for the album, and that has probably been one of my favorite parts of this album. I think it started with the Houdini stuff that they were doing, because that was the first lead single for it. Again, first single we've actually been given for an Eminem project in a while, which that itself was actually nice to get, and as part of that rollout of actually getting an Eminem single that was actually good and actually just lead up to the release of the project. I think it came out like a month or 3 weeks before the album came out, but I think the first sort of stuff was it Dynamo? I can't remember the exact magician they got on the video to actually work with Eminem, but it was kind of like a FaceTime video that they were doing together, and that built some anticipation for the actual album coming out. There was also the video of the kind of like whodunit sort of style that they sort of did. I remember me and Verse sort of discussing that, and it kind of helped like lead into theories about what this album could be about. It sort of helped tell the story of the album in terms of leading up to it, and I think that video was really what got like the features conversation going with who could be on here, because there were a lot of sort of like cameos in there. I think you had 50 Cent, I think Snoop Dogg and Dre were in it at some point. I can't exactly remember off the top of my head, but it was nice to get that sort of material for an Eminem album, because it felt like it was where it just felt like Eminem was being really creative for the first time in a little while when it came to actually anything outside of just the music, for example. And then also with Houdini as a single, that was actually the first music video we got for the death of Slim Shady, and honestly that was a really good music video. Obviously paid a lot of homage to the Without Me music video. It's packed with references to that video, especially with the whole Batman and Robin sort of Dr. Dre and Eminem sort of thing they had going on. But I genuinely think that was probably one of my favorite music videos of last year, and it's probably the most creative one that Eminem's had for probably since Godzilla. Actually, that was actually a really good music video that was put together, but it's one of the standout music videos of Eminem, which says a lot, because a lot of his like earlier day music videos, they're like really high quality in terms of like what they were doing creatively, and I feel like the Houdini one really lives up to that. And then on top of all of that, there were just like the other like interactive elements of things. Like there were a couple of like other like Instagram reels. For some reason they brought the hooked her girl into it with the whole like the gravestone that he had and then spitting on it or whatever, which was could have done without that, to be honest. But they did actually lead up to make it a bit more interactive, like whilst the album was kind of like it being released but still doing stuff around it. Like for example, you had it where each like they took different monuments or just like recognizable buildings, and then would have like Eminem in the Robin gear basically just climbing up it with like the Death of Slim Shady album revealing. And then probably one of my favorite ones from it is actually the milk cartons that they had going on, where it was basically you could just go into like, it was very rare to actually find it, but there were just like a couple of like empty milk cartons that had been left with like Slim Shady missing or something on side of it. And I think they did come with an Eminem signature on there too, but they were just randomly placed, and that was actually cool to see. It wasn't just an American thing either, because I did see in some Tesco's they actually had it here in the UK, which was nice to actually like see they were involving other countries outside the US, as that's the sort of thing you don't really seem to find outside the US a lot of the time. So really cool to see that sort of stuff, and I've wanted to make a good mention to the launch and rollout of the Death of Slim Shady, because it's probably one of my favorites to have lived through and experienced, particularly when it comes to Eminem. So really I think that's a massive highlight for when it came to the Death of Slim Shady, and one of the things I loved about it. But it's probably good to start talking about it a little bit more on the musical side of things, and we'll start with the single, because that's what we almost started talking about when it came to the rollout. But the single Houdini, honestly probably one of the best Eminem singles we have been given in probably the last, like, since Eminem's show. And when I say that, I don't mean like anything that was a single that came out, like particularly on like Recovery and Marshall Mathers LP2. Those have hits and they have great singles on there. But it kind of feels like there's been something missing from like a stereotypical kind of like what you think about when it comes to Eminem. I think of like the sort of like trilogy of singles, which is basically My Name Is, The Real Slim Shady, and Without Me. Those three go hand in hand, and Houdini, I think, perfectly fits into a quadrilogy of what goes on there and actually fits in with the vibe that those three kind of go with. You could probably throw something like Just Lose It in there too. Like, that's definitely the weakest out of those sort of tracks, but you get what I mean. Those are the kind of tracks I'm kind of on about when it came to a track like Houdini. It really did feel like it brought back that sort of typical classic style that Eminem and Slim Shady had, and I would still kind of argue it's probably the best song on the Def Slim Shady. From a more hits and radio play sort of side of things, it definitely is like the best when it comes to those. It's not necessarily, when I say it's like the best song on the album, I wouldn't say it's like the song I always go back to the most, but it's always a nice fun one to listen to when it does pop up when I'm going through the album or when it just pops up in a playlist. So I'll kind of like stick this into kind of like two different categories. You'll see this in the video chapters, because I think there's a side of it where I can talk about the tracks from a concept standpoint and also just from a musical sort of standpoint too, in terms of what I enjoy listening to. But I'll just stick with the sort of like musical side of it for now. And a lot of the tracks, when I first listened to them, I really loved and I really enjoyed. Probably one of the standouts was Brand New Dance, and for me it is a kind of like it was kind of like one of those songs where it's like you hear it once and you have a lot of fun, you don't need to hear it again. And obviously it really emphasized that sort of encore era of songs, and to me personally, encore isn't a great era of Eminem. I think in terms of looks it is, and his like branding around encore, amazing, but in terms of like the content he was putting out, definitely not great. And obviously Brand New Dance is basically taking the mick out of Christopher Reeves, which I know is a complete sort of like stamp mark of Eminem, but I honestly have never really vibed with it in that sort of sense. I don't think it's really, it's not really that funny to me. It's kind of like 14-year-old humor sometimes, and the irony is it does feel like it's beating a bit of a dead horse. But Brand New Dance, it was like a fun one-off listen, but it's one that I kind of like, I don't mind skipping if I'm going through the album. But regardless of that side of things, I think it does work in terms of the context of the album too, in terms of going through that kind of like old Slim Shady style, but I'll keep that for the next conversation. If you would ask me like my favorites of this, like Renaissance, when that first came out, I think was a great intro, and it always is a great like hard hitting intro to get you into the album. It's not one, I think it was one like a lot of people would say, like off the top of my head, I think NFR podcasts, they were sort of saying that Renaissance was probably one of their favorite songs off it when this album first came out. However, as a song, it's not one that I'd really like want to listen to. I think it's like too short, too quick for me to really like enjoy as an Eminem song, whereas it's just like, to me, I almost like read Renaissance and I have like the word intro next to it rather than actually just like it being its own song. But when it gets into Habits, that has been a song that has come up in the playlist pretty often for me, because I genuinely do actually love Habits quite a lot. And then this is kind of where you go on a good run, because Trouble, I think, is almost like a skit in itself. But when you get to Evil, Lucifer, Antichrist, and Fuel, that's really my favorite 4-track run on this project. And genuinely, I think those are probably some of Eminem's best songs that he's put out in the last like decade, particularly when you're trying to get that kind of like early style Eminem sound. And there's a lot of fun to be had in there. And obviously Fuel, I think it was a needed track in terms of having one of those tracks that actually had like a feature from a modern day artist, because as big as Eminem is, it doesn't feel like he really takes advantage of the people he could be put in contact with the features he can get. And I feel like that's what I actually really did like about Music to Be Murdered By. There were a lot of features on there from people who you may not expected, like Young M.A. for example, or Don Toliver, and it really worked and really helped kind of like elevate that project to another level. But there are still some of those rappers out there who I think Eminem just hasn't worked with, including the likes of Jid, that he really should be making more of those, like, more use out of those connections. And it was really nice to get a song like Fuel that has Jid on there and shows two amazing lyricists going at it, and they've recently done it again with Animals, and it would be nice to get a few more of those. As particularly, I think the one everyone would love to hear is like a J. Cole Eminem collab. I think that just needs to happen, and personally, if that were to happen, I could almost see that being like a modern day Renegade in a way. Like if they were to like link up for a song, that could genuinely be like a really good one to do and have that kind of like Renegade style to it, particularly if it comes out on J. Cole's Got my mind's gone blank. Is it the Fall Off or the Off Season? I genuinely can't remember off the top of my head. That album he's basically been pushing for 10 years but hasn't dropped. I think I could see an Eminem collab coming out on there. Obviously Houdini we've already spoken about. You also have Guilty Conscience 2, which I think is a really standout from a concept sort of side of things. I'll come back around to that in just a second, and then you sort of get, like, to me, almost bonus tracks on here, but I think the standouts on there are definitely Temporary and Somebody Save Me. Those definitely feel like songs that Eminem has put a lot of heart and a lot of love and care into creating, and you feel those through those songs. But that does not mean there aren't bad tracks on the album, because a song like Road Rage really is a disappointing track, especially when that's like one of the few Dr. Dre produced songs on here. It does not work as a song. There's just something really just off-putting about listening to it. As a sequel to the Slim Shady LP, Road Rage is probably the most Slim Shady LP song that you have on here, in my actual opinion, but yeah, it's like the most unlistenable song on the album. And then I think there's just a bit of back and forth in terms of what people do and don't like when it comes to this project, because for me, once you get past Guilty Conscience 2, you kind of almost get what I almost consider like a bonus or deluxe version of the Def Slim Shady, because to me just all of these tracks just don't really like feel like they fit on this project, or it feels like he finished writing Guilty Conscience 2 and then just after that kind of like didn't know what to do, but needed to make like an almost 20 track album and just felt the need to just throw on some like maybe unreleased music to be murdered by stuff. And for me personally, as an Eminem fan, I actually have learned to enjoy the songs, and I know some of you guys are gonna clown on me for this, but I do actually quite like Head Honcho, and I also do quite like Bad One. And the one I actually don't like, which I think a lot of you guys do like, is actually Toby. I don't like that song, just mainly from a fact of like it doesn't feel like it's an Eminem song. It feels like it's more of a feature song, and again that does apply to Head Honcho too, but I just think for Toby, for me, I don't actually like the hook of it. Like, that's just more of a personal preference thing. I don't like it. And Head Honcho is a song I can acknowledge as well, that is just like an Easy Mills song with an Eminem feature slapped on the back of it and then just put on a Eminem track. Like, even Easy Mill is actually on the hook too, so it feels like it's more his song than Eminem's, but Eminem's just gone, can I put this on my album instead? It's a bit odd in my opinion, but it's just like after Guilty Conscience 2, Temporary and Somebody Save Me, they work, but everything else just kind of like needs to just simmer down a bit and kind of like call it quits. And I think that kind of brings me to the concept of the project in terms of that conversation, because as a concept, the Def Slim Shady is really good. Like, genuinely, it has a very clear story in terms of what he's trying to set out and do with it, and the story he's trying to tell with it. And that's where the old Slim Shady comes back, kidnaps Eminem, basically trying to make him realize how not Eminem he is now, and tries creating an album where he's trying to get himself cancelled, and then Eminem basically escapes from being kidnapped and then actually kills that Slim Shady, which is why it then becomes the death of Slim Shady. It's quite wacky when you sort of say it out loud, but it does work when you go and listen through the project. I think some people probably took that concept the wrong way, and actually some people probably took it quite literally in terms of some of the stuff Eminem was saying on there, but obviously the whole point of Guilty Conscience 2 is to almost call out all of those like remarks he makes about trying to be offensive, everything like that, and I think that song kind of went over some people's heads. So the concept of the Def Slim Shady is actually amazing, and when you look through the actual like vinyl and stuff, like there's genuinely like this is encore basically, and from that era, because I think there are even rumors that Eminem was gonna do a Def Slim Shady album as his like 6th studio album, but obviously his overdose and like his drug addiction got too bad at that point and didn't want to make music, obviously, which is why you have like the back cover actually from that encore era, because he was actually planning to make something like that. And I think if you listen to the song like When I'm Gone, it's got the whole like Def Slim Shady sort of thing to it, or what is it at the end of the song? It's like Slim Shady's Goodnight or something like that. I can't remember off the top of my head, but it's nice to see that they kind of like drew a little bit of inspiration from maybe those like scraps ideas to like create this project. And again, you kind of have it built into the graphics here. And concept wise, it's a really good like way of kind of like giving Eminem an excuse to sort of go back into that bag of like old Slim Shady sort of style, and kind of like almost like bring back that old style, and just like kind of like it was really what he needed to almost like remind people who he is, and kind of help him create some of the traditional Eminem sound that people have been missing all these years. However, I think one of the things I've sort of realized lately is he needs to sort of trim down his albums, and I think this kind of goes for like just anyone in a legend status when it comes to rap, and I kind of noticed it with Nas. But one of the things Nas does, from at least my perception, is he doesn't overdo it in terms of like the tracks he's putting on an album. He almost keeps it quite condensed, quite concise, and but keeps all the good stuff within it. The problem that I had with the Def Slim Shady is the fact that you reach track 13, which is Guilty Conscience, and afterwards, as I've already mentioned, it feels like it then just becomes a bit of a deluxe sort of project, or it just becomes a bit of or it becomes a bit more like their bonus tracks, and they don't really fit into the scheme or the theme of the project. And if you had this end at like a track 13, this could have been considered like an Eminem classic potentially. And I think there's still some, I think in a few years' time, people would look at this a bit more fondly than they're probably looking at just a year in, because that's sort of like giving people time to more criticize it. Whereas more time from here on out is just going to be more time for people to learn to love it and appreciate more stuff about it. But I do think there's something to be said about trimming down a track list, particularly from a legend standpoint, to make an album more impactful, if anything. And if you were to ask me what tracks I would have kept, I essentially would have kept like everything from Renaissance up until Road Rage, because I would have removed Road Rage. Then you just get Houdini, Breaking News, and then Guilty Conscience 2. And then after that, I would probably just keep either Somebody Save Me or Temporary. I wouldn't keep them both. Out of the two, I would probably just put Somebody Save Me, and those are your 13 tracks you get on here, and have that as the ending track, because that's a perfect way to just kind of like sum up the entire concept in one album. And then if Eminem wanted to, just release it as that, and then do like a deluxe version with all the stuff we got in the expanded, and also all of the stuff that you get past Guilty Conscience 2, and then also you could put in Temporary onto that. Because to me, Temporary is a bit of a like When I'm Gone 2.0, and I just prefer When I'm Gone. It sort of works better as a track for me, but I do still appreciate what Temporary did, and it's still a really emotional song. So concept, really good. But I think the track list kind of like went on too long, that kind of, they basically kind of has an impact on how well the concept comes across, because it almost feels like once you're done with Guilty Conscience 2, that's the concept over, but you're still listening. It's almost like you're actually going through, like the credits are rolling, but you're still reading everything on it, which no one reads the credits. But that's kind of what this almost forces you to do. So from a concept side of things, it's an absolute great concept. However, just it goes on a bit too long for me. And I think that's what kind of can prevent it from being as loved as maybe it should have been. Although I will say, it's probably still, like, from what I hear from other people saying about the album when it comes up in conversation, it still sort of like sounds like there's a bit of love for it, and there's a bit more of like a positive response to it, particularly when you compare to like Eminem's last 3 albums. There's always going to be a sentiment around Eminem with the whole like he's washed, no one actually listens to him, that sort of conversation, which is just a bit of bullshit. I can understand part of it from a sense of like it's not the type of music that people really want from Eminem. I think part of it is sort of that side that he needs to dumb down the whole kind of like just rapping his arse off in every song, and that's something that I did actually appreciate about this album. I do feel like he dumbed it down a bit more. He was still clever in how he was rapping, however he did it in a way that was more digestible for people to enjoy, which is why I think the positive reception is so, or there's even a positive reception to it, because people were able to actually comprehend this a bit more and actually appreciate it. And I think one of the things that Eminem kind of lost in kind of like from say Kamikaze Music to Be Murdered By is the fact of his songwriting, which is something that people love so much about him. Felt like it was lacking, not from a sense of like he can't rap or anything like that, but just from a sense of like you want to listen to an Eminem song, you're not going to be picking any of the later stuff, because that's just more about the lyricism and the skill and ability in it, rather than the actual enjoyability of a song. And I think Def Slim Shady, I think basically was able to, it's the closest we got to him kind of like slowing down a bit and actually putting more effort into creating the songs. The only thing I would have probably appreciated a bit more is more of him on the tracks, because sometimes when I listen to this album, it doesn't feel like it's fully just an Eminem project. Whereas if I were to go back and listen to anything before it, especially like if I would take a recent example of Music to Be Murdered By, it still feels like it's an album made by Eminem, because he's on a lot of the stuff throughout it. Whereas on this, when it comes to a lot of the hooks, even in ad-libs, he's not really present. It kind of feels like he kind of does his bit in the verses and then almost steps away from the mic and lets the collaborator do their part, and there's not really too much of a crossover when it comes to it. So if I were to be ranking the Def Slim Shady as an album compared to a lot of Eminem's discography, I'm not going to do a whole tier list or anything, but I think it would probably sit somewhere around like the top tier of B. That's kind of how I'm feeling for this one. I think there's a lot of great stuff on here, and there's a really good concept on here which Eminem hasn't actually really done for a project before, or at least been as on the nose about a concept for something along the lines of this that's actually like telling a full story or anything. And I think that's really what stands out about the Death of Slim Shady. It's got that storytelling element to it that I think you're not really, not that you're not usually getting that with Eminem, but for a full album to have that with Ems, it's like really makes it stand out for that process. And I think especially from a modern standpoint of Eminem, it's a bit more slowed down and it's got a bit more craft behind the songs being songs. I think there's something to be said about the fact that they're actually like, a few of them seem to be kind of like cutaways from old stuff that kind of helps kind of like bring that sort of old aesthetic and theme to Eminem's music and sound. But I feel like a top tier beat is a good place to sort of put it. If I were to compare it to his last album, Music to Be Murdered By, I would actually debate about putting Music to Be Murdered By over this, mainly from a fact that, as I kind of mentioned, Eminem's a bit more on there throughout that project, and I think is a bit more creative when it comes to the type of songs he's doing with the people he's working with on there and the features that are on there. I think I could probably put them on the same sort of level, but I think there's something to be said about that project, and I think that project's probably going to have a bit more longevity than the Death of Slim Shady in the long term. So what about the legacy of the Death of Slim Shady? And this will kind of bring us to where we are today, because since the album release, we were given the expanded edition, which honestly is kind of a bit of a miss, to be honest with you. I think if they had gone down the route that I said of just like make this a 13 track album and then you add in bonus tracks as a fully expanded thing and you get like 5 or 6 of them, I think that would have worked a lot better, because the songs we were given as bonuses, they kind of just feel a bit filler more than anything. I think there was definitely a lot of anticipation built up for the expanded edition. I remember people thinking there was going to be a lot more to it, which I think was kind of unfair of it, and I think you kind of should have expected it was just going to be the bonus tracks. I think I was expecting at least a bit more of it. Granted, we did get the Fuel remix, and that was the first time we were given the modern day Eminem AI voice, I'm going to call it, because there's been a lot of conversation about this recently, particularly with the JID feature that Eminem did, and I do have a little bit of a theory on this that I'm going to kind of like delve into right now. A lot of people do not like this voice that Eminem has been using, and AI is something that's kind of been an interesting conversation, particularly around the Death of Slim Shady. I think it has been used. Obviously, it's not used, Eminem's clearly not using it to write his rhymes, but I think there's something to be said about the voice filter of it. I can kind of let it slide when it comes to the use of AI if it has been used on this project. I say if it has been used because I'm not certain if it has. I think there's a lot more people smarter than me when it comes to creating and mixing music that will know if it is or isn't. But I don't think there's ever been a confirmation from Eminem's camp to say they have been using AI. So it is a bit of a question mark. But if it was used on the Death Slim Shady, I think it was used well, and it was used in a way to help amplify and tell the story of Slim Shady coming back and being able to kind of get that old style voice back, and it really works for the story. Now, the one he ends up using on the Fuel remix is the one we got again on the Animals song. I really do like how Eminem raps under this voice. However, the thing I do not like about it is the way it feels and sounds. It does not sound clean when you listen to it as a song. It doesn't really make you want to replay it, no matter how good he sounds on it. And this applies both to the Fuel remix and the JID song too with Animals. Like, genuinely, I don't like the way it comes across and feels when I'm listening to it. His rapping, absolutely incredible on both tracks, and they really work. However, I think there's a bit more of a reason for this, because if you go through your Death Slim Shady, you don't hear this sound going on throughout it. So here's my kind of like conspiracy theory of it. I'm gonna go on a tangent from this video, but my conspiracy theory of it is the Death of Slim Shady dies in it. However, he's still out here using the Slim Shady kind of voice and sound. My theory on this is it's actually an intentional sound that they're going for, and it's supposed to be kind of like the ghost of Slim Shady. That's what I think it is. That's my little theory that I've kind of thrown out there. If you listen to the way it sounds, it doesn't sound like anything else that you put on the Death of Slim Shady, particularly when it comes to the AI filters that they might have been using. Like, if he wanted to recreate that voice, he would have just done what he did in like Houdini or something like that. Whereas this feels much different of a sound compared to what he would have done on something like Houdini. And I think the story it's trying to tell is it's the ghost of Slim Shady after he's died after the Death of Slim Shady, but this is his way of still being able to use the Slim Shady persona without kind of like breaking the kind of law he's made in the death of Slim Shady. So that's like the kind of theory I'd throw out there to you guys. Interested to know what you think about that. Is that kind of why he's using this AI filter that sounds a bit off? Because to me it does sound quite ghostly. So that's a little theory I kind of have about it. But in terms of the other sides of the legacy of this project, I think it's been a really good one for Eminem to at least have created. It's given us a lot of moments throughout the year since it was released. And I mean, just even looking at it, like the cover was iconic as well. Like I think this will go down as a maybe not his best project or anything ever in that sort of like top 5 conversation, but it will be one that people will remember fondly, and it will be one people will appreciate a little bit more when it comes to the years to come. But it kind of leads on to what's next, because we don't really know what's next. I mean, for me, I think at least for the next kind of like 8 or so years, we're going to get a decent amount of content from him, but I think it'll kind of be where he's looking to almost wrap things up a little bit. I think we're in for some form of collab project. I think that's most likely going to be a Bad Meets Evil 2 or the sequel to the sequel. I think there could be a Marshall Mathers LP 3 on the table. I'll be honest, I'd actually be quite up for like a King Mathers type album, like just make an album called that and have that be the retirement album. I think we're going to get some form of retirement album from M at some point down the line. This is more of a personal thing I would really like to see, but I would almost like kind of how Nas did with the Lost Tapes. I think especially of all the leaks that have been coming out, and this is another part of the legacy of the past year that we've had of the death of Slim Shady, because the leaks were a massive part of it. I recommend you go and check out this guy's video because he did a really good sort of breakdown on everything that happened into the lead up of it. However, just those leaks, just as a tiny bit of a conversation, it kind of like opened a door in terms of like maybe looking at how Eminem's kind of creating at the moment. It sort of kind of makes it feel like he's going into his own vault at the moment, taking stuff that he maybe like had pieces of and now reconstructing them to create the modern day stuff we're getting with like the Antichrist we actually ended up getting officially released, compared to the one that was leaked. So it's interesting to see that he's doing that, which makes me feel like there wouldn't be a kind of like Lost Tapes Eminem release, but that is something I would love for us to get, because I think there's a lot in Eminem's vault that he hasn't shared with us that we would really enjoy as fans to listen to. And then from there, I could probably see Eminem kind of stepping back into a more producer role. I think something I would love to see again is just kind of a bit more thought put behind the Shady records, because that's a whole video in itself, Shady records, but it'd be nice to see if there was something more to come out of that. But I think Eminem will probably kind of look to become more producer, kind of like executive producer sort of style of kind of like overseeing people's albums, helping them create sort of stuff for it, maybe dropping the odd feature here and there. But I think that's where we're kind of going to get with him wrapping up. And because I'm a vinyl channel, very quickly, I do quite like this vinyl. I feel like there was a little bit, it's not my favorite at all. I think it's a gatefold is where it falls off for me. Absolutely love the front cover, because this is an absolute iconic cover, probably one of the best covers of last year. You've got like the encore stuff on here that feeds in really well. This version of the vinyl is the marbled one that comes with the record, which I do actually really love. Actually, no, it's not. This is, okay, I actually marked it right. Okay, my bad, this isn't the marble one, this is the crayon version. Still nice nonetheless, but yeah, the vinyl for it is nice. I think it could have been better. Like, I would have preferred a lot more of the photography that you get on like this and on here. I would have probably even preferred like it's literally, this is like one side of the gatefold rather than it being on the sleeve, even though you technically get more with it. But that's sort of how I feel on the vinyl. Like, it's still really nice, but probably could have been much better in some areas, but I still like it. It's still a nice one to have. And I think that's sort of everything I kind of got to say about Death Slim Shady for now. I thought now would be kind of a good time to sort of like reminisce over it, speak about it, how it's grown, how it maybe hasn't, and sort of just leave it there. So if any of you guys have some thoughts about the Death Slim Shady in terms of what you've been thinking about it a year later, some of your memories from when it was released, I'll be happy to talk to you guys about it in the comments and hear your thoughts. If you did enjoy this video and you like vinyl related content and you like Eminem, make sure to subscribe, because again, we are on the road to 5,000 subscribers. But I shall leave it there, guys. Thank you very much for watching. I've been Ollie Rodriguez Stallman. I shall see you in the next video very soon. Take care.